So Godzilla Minus One is basically perfect. I don't even know what else I would say about it other than holy shit, my expectations for this couldn't have been higher and I'm still knocked on my ass. I legitimately think this is the best movie I've seen in 2023, and you could easily make the case that it's the best Godzilla movie anyone has made outside the original, maybe more. It's effectively flawless, dramatically sound, doesn't waste a minute of its screen time, never hits a false note, does smart things no other version has done with the franchise, while also feeling like a proper remake of the original and the first real thematic revisitation with those themes anyone has ever really attempted. It's an absolute masterpiece. For context, the reason I was so hyped about this, apart from being just a huge fan of Godzilla movies period, is that despite not being on paper the kind of huge forget everything you know reimagining that Shin Godzilla was back when it blew everyone away in 2016, if you follow Japanese movie culture, everything about this one has been decades in the making, but also not something that was ever assured to happen. What we've got here for the first time is Toho actually committing to not simply referencing the original 1954 version of their movie or flashing back to it or doing a modern take on it. This is basically the first straightforward Godzilla remake. Set in Japan directly after World War II, this time of actually a few years earlier than 54, and mainly focuses on the immediate post-war government, military, and civilian populace still in recovery mode, coping with the ongoing ravages of military humiliation, a rapidly reshaping Cold War world, American occupation, and nuclear fallout, as personified in the form of a rampaging atomic sea monster that's coming ashore and wrecking everything up because it pretty much can. And there's no other monster, no gimmick twist, no tie-in to the rest of the franchise or the American Monsterverse business, none of that. It's a straightforward, period-correct disaster survival drama where the utterly terrifying I'm going to stomp all your shit and you can't stomp me version of Godzilla shows up, and a country that's barely got its lights back on has to work out what to do about that with circa 1949 depleted civil defense hardware and anything else they've got. But the secret sauce this time is the selected filmmaker Takashi Yamazaki, who's about to be a household name worldwide for this, but for years has been Japan's best-kept domestic secret as a director of serious-minded big-budget blockbusters, an effects technician by original trade who broke out with the early aughts actioner Returner before pivoting to nostalgic melodramas with the Always Sunset on 3rd Street trilogy, a decade-spanning historical saga following the growth of a working-class Japanese family through the decades of change in Showa-era Japan, where turning his FX skills towards pulling off authentic period details and historical realism with Hollywood polish on a Japanese studio budget turned him into essentially Japan's post-90s Spielberg, the go-to guy for both stirring and somber historical tearjerkers like The Great War of Archimedes and Eternal Zero, and high-gloss 3D anime features like Dragon Quest Dormon and Lupin III. Plus, he was also the first person to ever direct a CGI version of the classic model Godzilla in a fantasy sequence from the Always Sunset movies, and he did CG sequences for one of the Godzilla theme park rides, so basically this specific guy getting to not only do a full feature for Toho, but take the first shot in 70 years at a straight-up remake of the original film is about the most hypothetically perfect creator-to-project marriage you can get, to the point where it can almost only live down to expectations, and yet he pulled it off. It's effectively nearly the exact movie I expected him to make in the best possible way, and also surprising in all the right ways as well. To that end, what makes this not 100% a remake is that the human characters are different, or more specifically, our center of focus is different. Whereas the original film was largely about government officials, media, and important scientists organizing the proper government response to Godzilla in demonstration of national resilience, this is a much darker, sadder view from the very bottom, literally looking up from where the giant dinosaur is just the newest, biggest thing that's about to step on you. Officials and bureaucrats are mostly off-screen, mostly doing their own thing to presumably little effect, and if not outright failing, and it's a recurring plot point that no, in real life the Americans or UN are not going to help or even acknowledge that this is happening because it might cause a problem with the Soviets or the Chinese. So instead, our POV is with the workers, mostly struggling survivors of the Tokyo bombing raids and subsequent fires, and specifically displaced and disgraced veterans living and working as shells of their former selves in a country that's all too willing to take out its loss of identity and difficulty coping with the war for any number of reasons on them. And without giving too much of the storyline away, our main character Koichi is a kamikaze pilot who didn't go through with his suicide attack. So instead of coming home to thank you for your service, he gets on the daily, maybe if you hadn't been a coward, other people wouldn't have died, or maybe we wouldn't have lost. And that's not even the only thing he feels guilty about preventing. So just as he's managed to sort of almost scrape together something like a life by turning his overwhelming guilt in the direction of helping out his worse off neighbors like a homeless girl and an orphan baby he pretty much adopts, and taking death wish please apply jobs like offshore mine removal, Godzilla shows up and just starts shredding the country into atoms basically by swimming or walking around existing. He and everyone else around him are faced with these existential moral dilemmas, and the fissures and the traumatized post-war Japanese psyche just comes spilling out of everybody. Someone has to figure out how to stop this, but haven't they already given literally everything for their country and government that treats its people, especially soldiers like him, as parts to be disposed of? But also, for others, it's a mad but irresistible call back to service, a sense that this time there's maybe a fight that can actually be about something, that can redeem them for their bad war, wasted lives, and make their losses matter. And what's more impressive, considering that Yamazaki has been working out how to make this specific emotion work in genre film for 20 years, is ways that it works without tipping over into the one-dimensional nationalism that characterized some of his straightforward military films before this. It's explicitly a movie about the people at the bottom of the decision-making in war and politics having to solve the mess anyway, and it's so real. In Yamazaki's signature handsome period-era postcard, if the figures had authentic emotions presentation about the psychic toll that it extracts, the question of how it's going to resolve remains a nail-biter right up into the end. This is an absolutely spectacular film, thrilling, big action, big effects, despite some of the overblown talk about how affordable it supposedly was, a discussion for another time, and despite some of the stupider people on the internet making a big deal about how it supposedly has nothing to say, when in fact it has tons of things to say, even if you're too dumb to figure it out. This is one of the best films of the year, if not the best of the year. 10 out of 10, a masterpiece. Go see it.